Hello everyone, Palumbo here. Before we start the video, you're innocent until proven guilty. Video we're doing today with regards to the case of Madeleine McCann. We're gonna have a look at the farce where Jane Tanner states she passed Gerry and Jez Wilkins. Now, to set the scene, folks, according to Jane Tanner and the tabled arrangements on the Thursday evening, Jane says that she sat next to Kate McCann. That is Gerry's wife. Take that in. She, Jane, is sitting next to Kate. The timeline goes as follows, folks. Well, supposedly. Matthew Oldfield goes away, checks on his own children, or his own child, as well as the O'Brien's children and the McCann's children. Matthew then comes back and sits back down at the table. So you have a full table. Gerry then goes away at 9:05. He does his check on his children. Then he leaves the apartment. Then when he leaves the apartment, goes back onto the road, he meets Jez Wilkins. So Gerry is away. So you have one empty seat at the table. Gerry. Whilst Gerry is talking to Jez Wilkins, Jane leaves the table. So you have two empty seats at the table, folks. Jane supposedly passes Gerry McCann and Jez Wilkins on the same pavement, and both Gerry and Jez Wilkins state they did not see Jane passing them. Now let's give Jane the benefit of the doubt and say she did make that journey. Jane goes on up the hill, goes to her apartment to check her children, and whilst doing so, Gerry McCann returns to the restaurant, folks. Now, like I say, everyone knows about the farce with regards to Jane passing Gerry and Jez Wilkins on the pavement, folks. But this is what Gerry McCann tells the detectives when he returned to the restaurant, folks, with regards to Jane Tanner. Bearing in mind, I have told you that Jane Tanner, in her statement, said she sat next to Gerry's wife, Kate McCann. Gerry McCann returns to the restaurant, having spoken to Jez Wilkins. So that leaves one empty seat at the table, folks. That empty seat next to Kate McCann would be that of Jane Tanner's. Next to Gerry's wife. Gerry comes back to the restaurant, and I assume he tells Kate everything's okay, Kate. All while there's an empty seat next to his wife. because Jane is still away. So there is one empty seat. Gerry McCann tells the detectives in his second statement the following. Gerry, following on, he returned to the tapas between 21:10 and 21:15. The dinner having gone as normal, as the movement of people at the table was frequent, he does not know if, when he returned, anyone else was absent, namely Jane, folks. Now that is impossible for him to say such a thing, folks, isn't it? Because he would know if Jane was away, because there would be an empty seat next to Gerry's wife, Kate. See how pathetic this case is, folks. Matthew goes away, comes back, full table. Gerry goes away, talks to Jez Wilkins in the street. So there's one empty seat. Jane goes away, passes Gerry and Jez Wilkins supposedly, so there are two empty seats. Jane carries on to do her checks on her children. Gerry returns to the table. I presume tells his wife that everything's fine with the children. And next to his wife, there's an empty seat. Why? Because Jane Tanner has gone away and she hasn't returned yet, folks. Gerry would not seek Jane leaving the table because he was away himself. But Gerry returned to the table before Jane returned, folks. So Gerry would be sitting at the table and Jane would be returning to the table having done her check on her children. But Gerry McCann tells the detectives the following: that he returned to the tapas restaurant. The dinner had gone as normal. As the movement of people at the table were frequent, Gerry does not know if, when he returned, anyone else was absent, namely Jane, folks. Now that is impossible, isn't it? Because, like I said, there would be an empty seat next to Gerry's wife, Kate. And Gerry returns at the tapas restaurant supposedly before Jane, meaning that Jane would still be away while Gerry was sitting at the table. And then Jane has to return to that table, but Gerry McCann cannot recall if anyone else was absent, namely Jane. It's pathetic, folks. Makes you think.